Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the Westminster Times. My topic for you today is Mark Carney's June 1 anti-Semitism speech at a synagogue in Toronto, where, in my opinion, he has really blown it, not only for the Jews, but for all Canadians. His remarks were meant to assuage Jewish fears about anti-Semitism. But did he do that? Not really. So, we're going to talk about Mark Carney's speech and why it's so critically important that Canada get this right. Anti-Semitism, the war in Israel, the war in Iran, it's affecting everything in our economy, and it's also affecting directly land claims, Indigenous grievance, DRIPA, cancel culture. So how do all these things connect together? I'm going to talk about that and how these threads connect together. So Carney's remarks, instead of really addressing anti-Semitism head on, what he did was what I would describe as a woke word salad, where he kind of introduced all the woke ideologies of inclusion and equity and equality, and that everyone is part of everyone else. That's really not the problem.
I'm pleased to announce today the launch and the membership of Canada's new Ministerial Advisory Council on Rights, Equality and Inclusion. It will be chaired by the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, Mark Miller. The Council has a clear mission: to combat racism and hate in all their forms, and to guide the Government of Canada as part of our efforts to build a fairer, more just, more inclusive society.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Carney said, how wrong it was, and I'm also going to talk about anti-Semitism in two forms. What I would call woke anti-Semitism, which is kind of sometimes described as left-wing anti-Semitism, and what is sometimes described as right-wing anti-Semitism, what I'm going to call classical or traditional or sort of radical anti-Semitism that we've known for a long time. So, and I'm going to make a case that the former, the woke anti-Semitism, is much more dangerous right now because it is taking over the state itself. So, something that has just happened recently is that a referee, a FIFA referee from Somalia, was barred entry to the United States because of a 2014 post that was extremely anti-Semitic, talking about Jews drinking the blood or sucking the blood of Arabs. This sort of blood libel, this, historic imagery of the Jew as an evil bloodsucker, someone who drinks blood. So what happens? David Eby gets on a microphone and starts defending him and saying, well, oh no, you're welcome here. Welcome him with open arms, and what a great tragedy it is that this person was barred the opportunity to ref in the World Cup. This is one of the traits of anti-Semitism we'll talk about. It's called double standards.
In British Columbia, he would be welcomed and celebrated for his accomplishments. We would be thrilled to have him refereeing games here.
One standard for the Jews, another standard for everybody else. For example, Selena Robinson, an NDP high-profile cabinet minister, kicked right on out of cabinet by David Eby. Why? Because she said something about a crappy piece of land that Palestine, a comment about geography, about a landscape, what it looked like, characterizing it. Not even about a people. And that was worthy of her being fired.
She screwed up. She made a really significant error.
He says the work that she now needs to do, given her comments, is incompatible with her remaining in cabinet, although she will stay in the NDP caucus.
And he sided with the mobs that went to her house to tear her to shreds. But no, he comes to the defense. of someone who invokes this gross anti-Semitic trope about blood.
For this callous government that continues to uphold genocide and colonialism.
Dozens of protesters overwhelmed police to deliver a petition calling for Robinson's resignation.
So Carney just sort of went into it and said some things that I think had no credibility whatsoever. He said, for example, the institutions of public life are not captured by any faith or identity.
Our secularism is open. The state takes no side in the matters of belief, and the institutions of public life are not captured by any faith or identity.
Well, from where I'm standing, where a lot of other people are standing, the institutions of public life have been captured. This is the problem with cancel culture and the woke religion. It sort of sees things through a different lens altogether. He said, also, every Canadian has the freedom of conscience to live and live fully as they believe.
In Canada, state neutrality doesn't empty the public square, but ensures that no conception of the good, including humanism or atheism, is privileged by state power, and that every Canadian has the freedom of conscience to live and live fully as they believe.
Really? This, as he rolls out Bill C-9, which religious leaders across this country, across the board from all faiths, are lining up to oppose because it almost makes the scriptures upon which they rest their faith hate speech. This overly broad definition of hate speech, who is he really coming after? Is it designed to protect the Jews? I don't think so. I think it's basically a plan to wokeify Canadian society.
I've spoken about the murder of the Afzal family in London, a family killed because of their Muslim faith. I've spoken about the rising anti-Semitism in Canada. Egregious, despicable things every day because of laws unenforced. I've spoken about the hate facing Christians, Sikhs, Hindus. Hate is real, but it will not be combated with legislation that goes after sincerely held religious beliefs, that stifles debate, that silences dissent, that criminalizes expression, and yes, potentially even the citation of religious texts. Now, I will go back to the most important part here, because Bill C-9 was deeply flawed and very concerning when it went into the Justice Committee. It was downright dangerous when it came out. With no witness testimony, no consultation, no meaningful intervention by any of the Liberal members of the committee, the Liberal and Bloc Québécois members teamed up to remove a decades-old protection for religious speech called the religious defense. It was actually something that Pierre Trudeau's government put in place. Back then, Liberals understood the importance of freedom of expression and religious freedom.
He kept referring to the Canadian Covenant and the right to equality and inclusion.
The covenant runs in every direction. Anti-Semitism breaks it, Islamophobia breaks it, burning churches breaks it, transphobia breaks it. The targeting of any Canadian for their faith, their origin, their identity breaks it.
So this word inclusion kept coming up. So how does Canada's approach to the Jews affect land claims in BC? Or how does it affect you in your day-to-day lives? Here in British Columbia in particular, who are facing concerns about property rights, DRIPA, and Indigenous activism and overreach, upsetting the apple cart of the entire economy of the province. Well, here's the thing. Just want to remind people what happened on October 7th, 2024. There was a rally in Vancouver on the steps of the art gallery, in front of the art gallery, and we were there, and we captured a woman at a microphone saying, "Death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel." So the people who are calling for the death of Israel are also calling for the death of Canada. Think about that. Why Why are they so concerned about Canada? Well, so this video that we shot was about 42 seconds long, and I'll read a couple of words, additional words that this woman said, which were very ominous. She praised the paragliders who came over the wall, loaded to the teeth with bullets and body cams, to viciously and callously murder hundreds and hundreds of innocent civilians. She praised them, she says, but where were they coming from? She said at a microphone that these people were under the thumb of one of the most powerful settler colonies in the world. They built paragliders to fly over a wall. So she says, do not wonder how revolution can be done. We must do it.
Do not wonder how revolution could possibly be done. Men who have never known a free day, who have lived their entire lives under the thumb of one of the most powerful settler colonies in the world, built paragliders to fly over a wall so high that it blocked out the sun when you stood underneath it. Do not wonder how revolution can be done. We must do it. Death to Canada. Death to the United States. And death to Israel.
Death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel. So we, who's the we? And who must we do it to? It is the settler colonies. So the way this is framed, and unfortunately the way that our Prime Minister absolutely failed to address and speak to, is the anti-Semitism that exists and grows right on out of Canada, out of our universities, out of our legal system. Like, our own political leaders are making anti-Semitic comments and not being called out on it. Carney's going to roll out all these laws. Is that what we really need, additional laws? So, Carney's remarks, I think, were not so much about combating anti-Semitism, but promoting an ideology which I call wokeism. And I'm going to introduce a word for you. Maybe I'm coining this word. I call it inclusitarianism. The doctrine of inclusion. So, and it's a religious doctrine that the highest and best thing we can do as human beings is to be inclusive. And I'm going to show how warped that thinking is. So I have a picture here of a recreation of the Last Supper. This was picture was taken by the United Church of Canada. It was sent to me as a news release with a whole media kit and all kinds of information. So what does this mean? This is a recreation of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. So what's the difference? Well, as we know, The Last Supper was a painting of the disciples and Christ celebrating the Passover the night before his crucifixion. Here's the thing. Jesus himself and all the disciples around the table were Jews. It was a Jewish religion with a Jewish Messiah in Israel. This is completely devoid of Jesus himself or any Jews. What was the criteria for selecting these people to be at the table? Well, it's integral to inclusitarianism that you are given brownie points effectively for the most rare bird that you can spot and include, capture, if you will. So here's a case in point. This person And they provided detailed bios for all of the people who were in the shots. So who is that person with all the makeup on? This is someone named King Julius. This person is described as an animal-loving, softball-playing, spiritual drag clown. So you can see how inclusitarianism works. If you want a seat at the table of the divine table where there's no Jews and no Jesus, you have to be a rare bird. So you have to be someone, this is not someone who does drag. This is not someone who does drag and is spiritual. It's a spiritual drag clown. So is this the only person on planet Earth like that? So you say, oh, well, so what? What does that have to do with Mark Carney? Well, one of the purposes of the speech in Toronto by Carney to the Jewish community was the announcement of what is called, it's a bit of a mouthful, it's the Ministerial Advisory Council on Rights, Equality, and Inclusion. So there's a roster of people that are on this council, and some people have started to pick apart the membership of this council and saying, well, wait a minute, some of those people are known to say very anti-Semitic things in the past. People are questioning the wisdoms. Well, I just want to talk about one of the people that I noticed on the council. It's this person, Aftab Irfan. So when I saw that name, I thought, wait a minute, that sounds awfully familiar. Well, Aftab has been busy in Westminster. She is involved with the Simon Fraser University's WASC, Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue. Well, New Westminster dreamt up something that was very woke. It was they kind of scrapped a whole raft of committees and replaced it with a jumbo committee that they called the Community Advisory Assembly. So how did people get chosen to be on this assembly? Well, it was based on what they called intersectional identity metrics. So the more rare you are, the more excluded you are, the more you need to be included, the more likely, it wasn't based on the knowledge of any particular municipal policies or length of residence or any domain knowledge whatsoever. So they loaded the committee with like 20% gender non-conforming people. And then they actually had children as young as 12, because we have to include them too. So in the past, I've talked about wokeism as being a combination of the social gospel, which is kind of a liberal Christian tradition that folds in the Marxist thinking, but also includes New Age religion. Well, this is, I think, why Dr. Irfan was chosen. Here's a picture of her. She is a presenter at the New Age Mecca of Hollyhock. I've talked about Hollyhock before in other videos. Hollyhock is like the epicenter of New Age religion in Canada. So what do I mean by New Age religion? Well, it's kind of more some of the more standard things like yoga and transcendental meditation or communing with your soul and body work and so on. But it also gets into an area which is quite, I think, radical. And I've got an example here. This is a course you can take this August. You can get over there. It's not cheap, by the way. It's called Guiding Souls to Cross Over. The theory is that when people face death, they are surrounded by benevolent, helping spirits. Well, what does that mean? They're described as spirit guides, known as psychopomp allies, always gather when death is near. So it's the practice of shamanic journeying to establish direct contact with a dying person's psychopomp allies, benevolent ancestors, animal spirits, gods and goddesses, angelic beings, deities, teachers and masters, long-standing alliances between the human realm and the spirit world. This is basically occultism, which would be very much forbidden by the Torah. I mean, Carney quoted the prophet Isaiah, and he was invoking the prophets. Well, would the prophets be all that on board with divining spirits and communicating with the dead from past lives? Well, no.
It just reminds us of our own humanity.
And everything here just has this special touch of love to it.
I've never had a bad conversation here at Hollyhock. Even when I'm silent, I'm having a great conversation.
But under Wokeism, it's a multi-faith religion, and it has to embrace all possible types of spirituality. We can't exclude anything. So that's evidence of this kind of woke religion that's being foisted on people, that someone like this would be included. They've just got check all the boxes. They're on board with New Age religion. So, and you come. How is that going to help the Jews? How is that going to help anybody? How is that going to fight people saying death to Canada? So, now to talk about anti-Semitism from the, I guess, traditional understanding of it. I think, and this is where I think that Canadians need to be more educated on what anti-Semitism is really all about. And I published a paper in 2006, and I republished it on the newwestminstertimes.com, newwesttimes.com, and we'll include a link to this paper. It's sort of a deep dive into anti-Semitism, going right back to the New Testament biblical times. So, as briefly as I can, many Jews trace traditional anti-Semitism to the Bible itself. The struggle between, or the conflict between the Jews and the emerging Christian sect. Now, and the belief that the Jews, quote unquote, murdered Jesus. Well, let's set the record straight on that. It's well known it was the Roman Empire. The Jewish people didn't resort to crucifixion. The Romans did not like the idea of a Messiah rising up to stir up trouble in Israel and lead a revolt against their power. So they seem to play one sect of Jews off against another. And at that time, Jesus and his followers, Jesus was a rabbi, one of many going throughout the countryside claiming to be the Messiah. There was a lot of people claiming to be the Messiah, so at that time, the Jews were interested in preserving their orthodoxy of their faith and making sure it was aligned with scriptures. So now, later on, now Paul himself was Jewish, the Apostle Paul, but he famously was on the road to Damascus and was knocked off his horse and went through a great conversion. And he felt that a calling to go to the Gentiles, so that the Gentiles would be brought in to the faith, and sort of what he said, grafted in to the lineage of Abraham. It was all about Abraham and his descendants, and the blessing that was given to Abraham would go to the Jews, and that the Gentiles would be able to participate in that by believing in Christ. So Paul specifically said that he asked the question, has God forsaken the Jews? He said, by no means. And he almost prophesied that the Jews would be restored. And he had great faith that the Jewish world, so now, would be that God had a specific and carefully planned role for them in history. Now, what happened in later in the Christian tradition is the church fathers came along and said, well, no. They started to introduce what they called a replacement theology, that the Jews had no longer had a role in history, that the church had replaced the Jews and they have become irrelevant, and they're really just people who are like anyone else who's rejecting the gospel. So now you zoom into the 300s when Constantine, the emperor of Rome, converted to Christianity, and Christianity eventually became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And what happened to the Jews thereafter was that they were certainly persecuted by the Romans, and the Christians in Rome and the Jews were similar in the sense that they were both being persecuted. But what happened was that discriminatory laws increased against the Jews. Well, you can't intermarry. Real estate restrictions, where you can live, what you can do, the jobs that are open to you. So into the Middle Ages, there was this ongoing persecution of the Jews. And I'm just going to read one short paragraph from this paper I wrote that, what kind of started happening around 1100. A series of things that happened. In 1182, King Philip Augustus of France expelled all Jews from the royal domains. That means in and around Paris, and confiscated all their property. In 1290, all Jews were ordered to leave England, their possessions reverting to the king. 13th century France saw all Christian loans owed to Jews canceled, and numerous bogus ritual, murder, and host desecration trials proceed. Germany saw plundering gangs massacre Jews. In 140 communities in 1298, during the plague of the Black Death, in the 14th century, it was widely believed that the Jews had caused the plague by poisoning the wells of Europe with a vile mixture of animal and human parts combined with the sacred host. These outrageous allegations led to unprecedented slaughter of Jews throughout Europe for the remainder of the century. The once relatively stable Jewish communities of Spain were thrust into turmoil by rising Christian hostility toward the Jews, leading to widespread massacres in 1391. The violence against the Jews led to tens of thousands of Jews converting to Christianity to save their lives and property, setting the stage for one of the most infamous church institutions in history, the Spanish Inquisition, where they basically said, hey, wait a minute, you've converted to Christianity. How do we know for sure that your faith is real? We're going to torture you. It was the worst, because if they didn't recant, they were burnt at the stake. So not long thereafter, the Jews were just completely kicked out of Spain. So one of the features of anti-Semitism throughout the Middle Ages was these conspiracy theories, these blood libels, these allegations that the Jews would secretly steal the sanctified sacred host and do things with it. They would stab it or kill it anew. They would poison wells. And this set the stage for the Emancipation and the Enlightenment, which held some promise for Jews because, the religious superstitions of old would be set aside, and Jews did enjoy some reprieve during that period. Benjamin Disraeli became the Prime Minister of England. But it was short-lived. A new form of anti-Semitism rose up that could be described as scientific anti-Semitism. And this term, anti-Semitism, was invented by someone named Wilhelm Marr. And some people will say, well, anti-Semitism is a misnomer because it really applies to the Arabs and the Jews. Well, there's some truth in that, because the term anti-Semitism comes from the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The Shemites are the descendants of Shem. But the word anti-Semitism was specifically invented to apply to the Jews, who he described as basically subhuman. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, this famous forgery of this conspiracy. That conspiracy theory, although completely debunked, was just resuscitated by Hitler in his campaign of misinformation and hate against the Jews. Well, here's the problem, that conspiracy concept lives on, and this is what I would call the classical, somewhat, what is sometimes described as right-wing, neo-Nazi, extremist anti-Semitism. It's this idea that there's a cabal of powerful people in the world that are pulling the strings, controlling the media, controlling Hollywood. So this type of extremist conspiracy theory ideas is kind of the heart of traditional, long-standing anti-Semitism. And this is kind of where woke anti-Semitism and right-wing anti-Semitism meet in the middle. It's all about demonizing the Jews and coming up with conspiracy theories. So on the left, the conspiracy theory is that the Jews are evil colonizers and bloodthirsty and out to commit genocide. The people who had a genocide committed against them during the Holocaust are now painted as committing a genocide against it. They're genocidal. So this allegation is leveled against Canada. You know, mass graves. It's directly connected to the anti-Semitic methodology of demonizing a population. So this is why it matters so much to Canadians, and Mark Carney just simply got it wrong. He's talked about transphobia, Islamophobia, and this is one of the big problems, is that politicians will talk about, well, we have to combat Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, as if they're the same. They're not even remotely the same. There is deep hatred of Jews in Islam. They don't want them there. And then this is how it connects into world affairs happening right now. The US and Israel have attacked Iran to deprive them of a nuclear weapon. Now, people on some extreme right circles are saying, oh, well, this is just evidence that Israel is controlling the United States and controlling Trump. Oh, they probably got some dirt on him through Epstein. Oh, Epstein was Jewish, you know. Well, this Jewish person is, you know, there's dirt on him, on Trump, so therefore the United States is doing the bidding of Israel. This is a conspiracy theory that needs to be rejected. So you have that kind of conspiracy theory about Israel. Then you have the jihadist conspiracy theory. Then you have the woke muddle in the middle, where really the woke religion is after, let's face it, the Christians. People, and ultimately the Jews, in my opinion. Because they reject any exclusive claim to truth, any exclusive claim to fellowship, or any beliefs in any kind of doctrine that is not, quote unquote, inclusive. So this is the problem, is that the woke politicians of our country are turning Canada into somewhat of a national joke. This is going to create a lot of tension between the United States and Canada. And who knows, I would attribute a lot of the animosity of the administration to this kind of woke mindset. It's affecting international policy. You have Mark Carney out there recognizing Palestine at exactly the wrong time and kind of turning a blind eye to the kind of ceasefire motions and the rallies. And then they say, well, we're rolling out these new laws to combat it. It's not about the laws. It's very difficult to bring a criminal charge against even someone who has committed murder. And there's evidence proving in court that crimes have occurred is very, very difficult. So what is needed? It's called leadership. We need the Prime Minister of this country to state out loud that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Because Zionism is simply the belief that the Jews should have a homeland in the Holy Land. And there are Jews that believe that, and there's Christians that believe that. Is this so it will be spun around and painted as some kind of an evil? They'll say Zionism is fascism, Zionism is racism. They say it daily from these pulpits at these rallies. We've been there. We've recorded it. We have it on film. So what's needed? We need leadership. We need David Eby to call out anti-Semitism, not welcome someone who's made truly despicable statements about Jews, sucking blood out of Arabs. He was very harsh with Selena Robinson, as we've said. So this is why it's so crucial that our leaders get this right. Because it affects, we have indigenous people in this country that are aligning themselves with the pro-Hamas movement because they think it's about land back. Well, from Turtle Island to Palestine, we're going to get our land back. They want to the Jews off the land, and they're willing to kill the Jews to get them off the land. What are they willing to do to average Canadians? They want them off the land. They want them off. So, maybe that's a sign. It's very serious. Oh, they're coyotes. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So this is why it's so critical that people think about anti-Semitism and not just think about it as something that applies to Jews. The themes that are surfaced and floating around in all of the anti-Semitic rhetoric are directly affecting all Canadians. It's a threat to Western civilization. We need to wake up and understand it. So, I thank you for watching today. If you appreciate our journalism, I invite you to go to newstimes.com and subscribe to our newsletter. And also you'll notice on our homepage there's a button that says support our work. It's up in the right-hand corner. If you would feel so inclined, you just click that button, support our work. We do have costs. It is not free to do the journalism that we do. Independent journalism costs money, and we want to expand our efforts. We want to do more and more and more. So if you'd like to see more, and you're able to help us, we would really appreciate it. So until next time, thanks for watching.